Get ready for a clash of titans between two Russian powerhouses, Ian Nepomniachtchi and Sergey Karjakin, in a game that starts with a very surprising opening choice. Right out of the gate, Nepomniachtchi plays a rare and inaccurate first move, immediately giving up the opening advantage. The engine much preferred a standard approach, for instance, pawn to e4, met by the Sicilian with c5, knight to f3, pawn to e6, and bishop to e2 for a solid, normal game. But in the game, Nepo opens with the bird, pawn to f4, a provocative move that hands the early initiative right over to Karjakin. Karjakin immediately challenges the center with d5, and now we see a very symmetrical structure take shape, as both players fianchetto their bishops, settling in for a long, strategic battle. After some quiet development, it's Karjakin who strikes first. The pawn lunges forward to d4, putting the question to white. Knights hop into the center, and Nepo is forced to capture on d4, opening up the position. And here it is, a brilliant shot from Karjakin, as the knight takes the pawn on d4. This is a fantastic sound sacrifice designed to rip open white's position and win material. Nepomniachtchi has no choice but to accept the challenge, and the knight recaptures on d4, and Karjakin follows through perfectly. The bishop takes the knight on d4, the only move that makes the whole sacrifice work and keeps his advantage. With the tactical fireworks settling for a moment, both players focus on safety, castling their kings. The knights begin to maneuver, probing for weaknesses and looking for the next point of attack. A tense maneuvering phase follows. The queens and knights dance around the board, with neither player willing to commit to a decisive plan just yet, preferring to improve their positions. The jockeying for position continues as more pieces join the fray. Finally, Nepomniachtchi decides to clarify the situation, and the knight takes the bishop on d7, leading to a simplification. What a move! Karjakin finds the only way to hold everything together, recapturing with the queen on d7. This is a crucial defensive move that maintains the delicate balance of the position. The rooks now slide to the c-file, and the game rapidly transitions towards an endgame. A flurry of exchanges on the d4 square clears the board, leaving a complex but seemingly level position. But now Nepomniachtchi begins to build serious pressure. His bishop lands on the powerful e5 square, clamping down on black's position and forcing the rook back to a passive post on a8. And there it is, an absolutely spectacular move from Nepomniachtchi. The queen slides to b3, a brilliant and totally unexpected sacrifice. Here's the stunning idea. If black takes the queen on b3, the pawn recaptures. Black can win the rook on f2 with check, but the king simply takes back, and white is completely winning. Karjakin has to go for it. The bishop snaps off the rook on f2 with check. Unbelievable. A second brilliant sacrifice in a row. The king calmly takes the bishop on f2, completely ignoring his own hanging queen. This is the entire point of the combination. With no other option, Karjakin finally captures the now undefended white queen on b3. And this is the final piece of the masterpiece. The pawn recaptures on b3, a fantastic move that secures the win. The point is, the passed pawn is now unstoppable. If the king tries to run to f8, the pawn storms up to b5, pawn takes, and the bishop simply takes the rook on a8, winning the queen. Under immense pressure, Karjakin makes a small slip here that accelerates the end. His best chance was to play a patient king move. King to f8, white pushes the pawn to b5, black takes, the bishop captures the rook on a8, and after the rook recaptures, black is still fighting. Instead, in the game, Karjakin pushes the pawn to b5, which unfortunately makes white's winning task much easier. And now it's Nepo's turn to miss the most clinical path to victory, letting a bit of his advantage slip. The most crushing continuation was to activate the rook immediately. Rook to a1, eyeing the rook on d8. The king steps up to e3, rook to c8, and bishop to d4 would have completely paralyzed black. Back in the game, though, Nepo plays bishop to d4 right away, which is still winning, but gives Karjakin a glimmer of hope. Black tries to create counterplay by pushing his pawn to a5, and the pawns are immediately traded off. An excellent defensive move from Karjakin. The rook takes the pawn on a5, the only way to stay in the game by activating his last piece for some desperate threats. The endgame suddenly becomes incredibly sharp. Nepo grabs a pawn on e7, but Karjakin's newly active rook becomes a major nuisance, landing on a2 with a check. In this tricky position, Nepo's king move is another slight inaccuracy. The safer square would have kept black's counterplay completely under control. King to g1 was best. If pawn to c4, the pawns are exchanged and then recaptured, and the bishop move to d5 simply shuts everything down. But in the game, Nepo plays the king to f3, which allows Karjakin to continue creating problems. Despite the fierce resistance, Nepomniachtchi's advantage is simply too great. He methodically converts his edge, bringing his rook to the powerful c7 square. Black's rook gets one last gasp, snatching a pawn on h2, but it's far too little, too late. And at this point, Sergey Karjakin resigns. A fantastic fighting game, but White's position is completely hopeless. Nepomniachtchi wins. Here's just one sample line showing why it's over. If Black pushes the pawn to c3, the rook simply takes it. The rook swings to a2, but White's rook returns to c7, trapping and winning the rook on a8.